speaker is Daniella Traino. She's a business leader. She's well known in the industry. Cybersecurity, formerly of CSIRO and Data 61. She's co-developed the cybersecurity business strategy and is responsible for their business development and global innovation partnerships for the cybersecurity domain. She's also a member of the Research Advisory Committee for the Internet Commerce Security Lab, a cybersecurity research unit of Federation University Australia, and she was also a judge of the 2017 Finnies, the FinTech Awards, and is a contributor to 2017 Startup Secrets, How Australia Can Create New Businesses with FinTech and Cybersecurity Industry Collaboration. So there we go. Thanks, Daniella.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Eitan and team, for inviting me today. I thought I might just sort of change it up when it comes to cybersecurity, and it's probably partly due to my background. One of the things that I wanted to sort of put out there is more the innovation imperative when it comes to cybersecurity. And I don't think it's well known, but our industry in cyber is really an immature one. And you can probably see that because we're still struggling with yesterday's technology, let alone what you in the room are about to develop and throw out. So I think there's some things that I wanted to share with you in terms of context, but also my parting message really is, in order for us to solve some of the challenges in cybersecurity, but also unlock the value that you as entrepreneurs want to develop and take out of the Internet of Everything, we actually need to think of it as an ecosystem approach. And it's not something that just the security professionals alone are going to be able to solve. And this is my really big takeaway message, but some context. If I can get the clicker to work. Maybe not. Next one. Woo. Okay. Sorry. Old tech. So, first question people tend to ask is, do you really care about cybersecurity, or should you? And if I can get my slides working, a bit of context of whether you should or shouldn't, but I think one of the things you need to take away is that our population is obviously growing, and whether you take these numbers or not, and it depends where you look, the numbers will be, plus or minus 20%. Our population is increasing. Internet pervasiveness is also at the same time. And yet the number of devices, and depends whether you look at Gartner, Forrester, or anybody else at these days, is roughly going to be, at this point, we've already surpassed it, number of devices per person in the world, and the number of internet-connected devices in the world. We've already surpassed that on a per-person basis. That's an interesting statistic if you think about cybersecurity, and I'll show you why. Then you think about this also. By 2020, we're going to have 25 plus billion embedded in intelligent systems. Now you can debate whether that's intelligent, smart, or insecure, or otherwise, but that's a really interesting proposition if we haven't solved the cybersecurity challenge. And as my previous speakers today have already mentioned, it's all about the data, right? Once you've unlocked the data, that's where the business value really comes from. But we're churning out, whether it's you in the room or others in our system here, we're churning out 50 trillion gigabytes of data by 2020. That's huge. It's fantastic when you look at the business opportunity or the revenue opportunity. But what about the security implications? And you hope to God we have some answer for them. And obviously with the connected people, whether that's physically connected or in terms of hardware. Now, by 2020, various people in the world will tell you there's going to be over 25 billion devices connected, right? So let's break it down. If you've got 20 billion devices, that's going to be the industrial Internet of Things, possibly about 3.5 billion of those. Then we talk about my favorite today, automotive, which, if you believe it, in the UK by 2025, about 85% of the automobiles in the actually out on the roads will be connected automobiles. And if you believe Tesla in the last week or so, they're at level 5 autonomous system already, right? So this is just a matter of weeks, according to them. Realistically, that's a matter of years. Then you look at the consumer side. We've got 8 billion devices, communications, even military and aerospace, the amount of connected things that they'll have on those devices, sort of endpoints, you're looking at least 5 million devices. If I'm a security sort of attacker, if I've got that mindset, and it's going back in my career now, I would think, my goodness, this is rich pickings for me, right? So before, you used to be trying to be on the inside of an organization, but they've hardened those with various levels of technologies and perimeters. Now I've got so many more devices at my fingertips, some of which you may not even be aware is connected to each other. So that's a really rich attack surface from a cybersecurity perspective. Now, cybersecurity is really industry agnostic. If you were to do a scan of the media, they'll tell you it's not specific to financial services. It's not specific to the industrial Internet of Things. It's actually quite diverse. And what we've seen more recently, even just at the bottom right, before you look at the webcam, in the last couple of years, we've seen the normal physical cyber attack mechanisms, whether they are criminal gangs, actually using cyber means to affect that. So for example, the port of Antwerp a couple of years ago was subject to a cyber attack in which they used the systems, the underworld used the systems in order to redirect the physical goods so they could actually smuggle certain, what you would call illegal substances of certain volumes. They've used cyber means to affect that. We're seeing that in the convergence of the cyber physical and logical world. And more recently, we've seen webcams, which have been internet enabled, become rich pickings for those who have tendencies that we would think is not normal. Now, they are being affected by things as bland as basic ID and password defaults, which you'd be surprised because you're using devices that don't necessarily have that level of strength. And that's what they're using. They're not using some really funky technology means, and we've seen some of that, whether it's the APTs of the world that they call nation-state attacks. They happen. With more frequency of late. But more often what we're seeing is it's really basic security hygiene that we're not getting right. And we're not getting that right up until now. And now we're about to unleash 25 billion plus devices that are connected in the world, and yet we haven't even solved yesterday's problem. So this is the thing that I want to really sort of reach out to you. Should you care? Well, at some point, when you start connecting devices and people, and you look at the fact that this is now going to be rich pickings, we haven't solved the basics. And if you're not going to get the basics right, there's a whole lot of other security capabilities that you're not unlocking. And it is industry agnostic. And that's one thing I absolutely want to stress. The other thing that's been interesting, you might have seen, is that traditionally when it comes to cyber attack, you think that what they're after is your data. And that's very true. But as my previous speakers also mentioned, they're also after your compute power. Because if they can't get your data, they'll use the compute power to get the data from somewhere else, particularly if you think of the quantum computing advances. So last year, you might have read that the most famous botnet attack was the Mirai botnet, which effectively was using the default ID and passwords of DVR recorders and webcams to actually harness the compute power and take down the Dyna network. And Dyna was actually providing services to Netflix and Spotify and a few others. So whilst Netflix and Spotify themselves may not have had IoT connected devices to protect, there are others out in the world who are using those devices who could actually be using those harnessed compute power and take down their services. So this is why I'm saying, and it's very similar to what Genevieve Bell was saying this morning, where how you flow information is also the same with how you flow compute power and communications. It might not be your direct problem, but through something else, it will become your problem. And this is why I think we need to think more broadly. The right one here. And we're still struggling. Like, as I said before, we're struggling to actually protect information and assets today with existing technology. You put IoT devices and connected devices out there, which effectively everything and everyone will become. This is only going to get larger. And whether you look at it by volume or by classification of information that's been breached, it's a really horrible space to look at, right? So it looks negative, and it is generally a scary place. But there's some things that we need to be thinking about. And the first is, if you think you're not internet connected, think again. And even if you're looking at industrial Internet of Things, it's quite likely that you've turned on the internet for remote access to be able to monitor and manage that system. But in actual fact, you've probably enabled a very basic port 80. Right? So these are the things you need to have an awareness of what it is that you're connecting and what that state of that connection is. So what I'd like to show you is that the next thing that we should be really thinking about in that context is an ecosystem approach to cybersecurity. And my fellow panelists also had a very sort of technical view on some aspects for you to think about. I sort of present to you the humble car. And let me show you what I'm thinking in this space. This is where innovation really can actually drive huge business value but if you consider security as the brakes on your Ferrari, it could actually help you go faster. But you need to think of it sooner than later, because if you wait too late in the cycle, it's going to cost you 5 to 10 times more. So if you think about security and privacy, it can actually enable a hell of a lot. Let me show you this. So if you take the car, in actual fact, there is up to 100 ECUs in today's car. Each ECU is compute power. Each ECU has connectivity and provides some sort of gateway services. Now, if you also think of the fact that on an hourly basis, each connected vehicle, let alone autonomous, each connected vehicle will upload 25 gigs of data an hour. I mean, that is phenomenal. If you were to unlock some of that, and some of it's just system information about the running of a car, but the more connected you have these vehicles, you'll actually start taking information about a person, which can help around insurance, can also help around safety. You know, it unlocks huge amounts of benefits, but from a security perspective, how are we protecting that? There was a survey done more recently by KPMG automotive executives that asked consumers, who owns the data in your car if you're connected? Do you know what the answer was? More than 41% said, I'm the sole owner of that information and I want to control who gets what and what they do with it. But that's something we haven't yet solved. We haven't yet worked out how even to model that into these cars. So security can unlock that value, but it comes at a price if you think of it too late in the cycle. And then you think of this, my favorite. So software is ruling the world, as we know, but it depends on who you talk to. They'll tell you 95% of security incidents are driven by software vulnerabilities. So look at the humble car. We have, in a 747 Boeing, 100 million lines of code. Now, a couple of the boffins in the room will tell you, if you get down to a kernel level, there's about 4 vulnerabilities per lines of code. Can you imagine at this level? So as an attacker, I'm looking at that thinking, oh my God, I have such an attack surface to do certain things, and let's hope they don't. But we haven't yet worked out how to do software security. And so what you're seeing on the market is a lot more work around how do we test software, and not enough on how do we build strong software. So that's a consideration. And then you think about all the ecosystem that goes around this, because unless you're in New South Wales where they sold off the poles, those poles will get electrified with a whole manner of different other capabilities. But the privacy and security of that hasn't actually been considered. And if you're driving down a road, what ambient data are you picking up? Fantastic as a car manufacturer, because you can build more services, but who owns it? Who's giving you the right to take that data? And even if you've got 2 of these cars side by side a freeway, who's actually owning that data? And what makes you think that it isn't got personal information of the driver in the next car? We haven't thought about that. So this is what I wanted to leave you with, in that there's lots of questions, there's lots of things we can do, the world is not going to end, but if we don't think of this as an ecosystem, we're going to miss out on huge opportunities for our communities. But we're also going to be at risk of some really, really big security vulnerabilities and incidents, which could have actual personal consequences, not just system and compliance and financial costs. So I can go on, but I'm told I've got to stop right now.